Welcome to Mid-Century Living, your weekly nostalgia podcast about the best of technology and culture from the mid-20th century.
Welcome to episode 51 of Mid-Century Living, the show where we talk all about the best of the mid-20th century and how to add vintage vibes to your modern life. We're your hosts, Jackie
and Gonzalo. Thank you for joining us today. So we are going to continue our spooky October month by talking about The Exorcist. The film, not like the random guy. But first, Jackie, how was your week?
My week was good, continuing to be spooky at all times. It is, as I mentioned a couple episodes ago, officially the year of the skull pan. I am obsessed with my Nordic Ware skull cake pan. So far, I've made healthy protein muffins and little baked oatmeal cupcakes in there. I've made little meatloaves in there. I still have not made my pizza skulls, but
that's mostly because I told you on the air that I was going to give you my pizza dough recipe like 3 weeks ago, and I just sent it to you on Friday.
Yes, so I might make those this weekend. Still thinking about it. Non-food talk, spooky related, is I finally used my library card. So we actually live really close to a library. We just moved here less than 3 years ago. But I went to the library to get my eclipse glasses for the eclipse months ago. And while I was there, I was like, you know what? I should get a library card while I'm here. And I finally used it because there's a new straight-to-Hulu version of Salem's Lot by Stephen King that just came out. And I decided that before watching the new one, I think I'm just going to read the novel. I haven't read a Stephen King book in a really long time.
That's smart.
And I just think it would be cool now that the weather's getting nice and I have patio furniture. Like, I just want to, sit outside and read a book. So I actually went to the library and picked up a copy of Salem's Lot, and that's going to be my October spooky book this year.
Nice. When we started this podcast, I filled out an application to get myself a library card, and it's still on the desk over there.
Aw. But anyway, how was your week?
Good. My week is just standard. Nothing interesting has happened, spooky wise. The only thing I can say is that it's finally getting to the temperature where we want October to be at. It still gets pretty toasty in the evenings. Yeah. Here it's been in the 90s in the evening, but not humid, just kind of weird and nice.
That is nice.
But in the mornings it's really nice, and it's very tempting to take the roof off the Jeep.
Ooh.
And I really want to, but then also in the afternoon I'm driving home from work, then it's hot. But I went for a run yesterday, and in my neighborhood, and I passed one of my not neighbors. They live 3 streets down. I don't know them, but they have a white Jeep. And they had it parked in their driveway with the roof off and the doors off. And I go, maybe it is time. So stay tuned. Maybe I'll take the roof off. It happens in stages. First, I take the front part off for a few days, right? Mm-hmm. Then if there's no issues with rain coming in the next couple of days, I'll take the actual roof off. And then the doors are more like a spur of the moment. Okay, I don't have anywhere to go that my car's gonna get stolen. I'm going to the gym. I can just drive to the gym without doors.
Yeah, it is finally nice weather. That's true.
Yeah. So Jackie, have you seen The Exorcist the movie, or have you just seen the 30-second reenactment by bunnies?
I have seen both. And thank you for reminding me about the 30-second reenactment by bunnies. I don't think I've watched this since high school. Hang on, pause for effect.
While she watches this, guys, there is a cartoon version of movies. This guy animates little bunnies, and they're 30-second synopsis of movies. And we'll link this one in the show notes. But if not, just go to angryalien.com, and they're hilarious.
Man, that is pre-YouTube internet fun video.
Yes, 100%.
Thank you so much for reminding me about that. But no, yes, I have seen the actual Exorcist. I've been making a point, I think I mentioned in other podcasts, to rewatch the classics. And not rewatch. I am new to horror relatively. It's not I'm not a big scary movie person, but I've been trying to get the required reading out of the way the past couple of years. So I watched The Exorcist for the first time and only time 2 years ago.
Okay.
So hopefully I'll be able to follow the episode. Like, I'm not too fuzzy on the details. It made an impact. What about you? How many times have you seen The Exorcist?
Well, I've actually only seen it once. I always kind of avoided it because of its topic, right? I don't know, something about possessions and growing up and like I don't know. I kind of want to stay away from it. But not too long ago, I was like, you know what, I should watch it, and I kept pushing it off, and then we started Spooky Month, and I was like, I want to talk about this. So I bought the book because this movie is based on a 1971 novel titled The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, who also wrote the screenplay for the movie. So my intention was read the book, watch the movie, talk about it in the podcast. And I read a third of the book, watched the movie, and now I'm talking about it in the podcast.
Hey, that's not bad, since you just sort of were inspired. I guess, like, the main jumping off point was the Ouija episode.
Yes.
Right? Because you mentioned that there's a Ouija board scene in The Exorcist.
Yes, and more about that later. But yeah, that's like, as soon as we finished recording, I bought the book. And then the book arrived, and then life happened, and I didn't get a chance to finish it. So I apologize for that, guys. I will finish the book. But the book chronicles the last sanctioned Catholic exorcism to take place in the USA in the 1940s, and the movie follows it, at least from what I read in the book, pretty much 1-to-1. So let's jump into it. Jackie, did you know that The Exorcist is a Christmas movie?
No. What? There's nothing Christmassy in it.
Nothing Christmassy in it, but it was released on December 26th of 1973.
Oh. What an awkward time of year to release it.
I know. It's more like a Boxing Day movie, though. So yes, this is kind of a rule breaker episode because it happens technically outside of our established dates, right? But it's spooky. The movie's a classic supernatural horror film that follows a demonic possession and subsequent exorcism. It was directed by the late William Friedkin, one of the, quote, new Hollywood directors of the 1970s, and starred Ellen Burstyn as Chris McNeil, Max von Sydow as a priest Lancaster Marin, Jason Miller as psychiatrist and priest Damien Carras, and Linda Blair as Reagan, the girl who gets possessed. So I think we should maybe do a quick summary of the movie. What do you think?
Yes. So spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen The Exorcist yet. Go ahead and pause the episode right here. Go watch it. We'll wait. And then you can come back. Or you can just skip the summary he's about to say, and we'll put a link in the show notes with the timestamp.
Yes. So obviously spoilers ahead. And we'll keep it brief, right? It's just a quick rundown. So the movie starts with the priest working on an archaeological dig in northern Iraq. This is where we meet Lancaster Marin. And he finds a stone talisman and has a vision, and that's about it. The next scene is in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. at the university. And here we meet the main character, Chris McNeil, who is starring in a film directed by friend Burke Dennings. Chris and her daughter Reagan live near the university where they are filming, in a luxurious house with hired help. And we also meet Father Carras, a psychiatrist who counsels the Georgetown University priests. He confides to a colleague that he is having a crisis of faith. During the early film, we also have a scene where Reagan shows her mom that she's been playing with a Ouija board she found in the basement and says she's been talking to someone she calls Captain Howdy. And when she tries to show her mom, we see the planchette moving seemingly by itself when Reagan goes to ask a question.
And I mentioned this already, but if you haven't already listened to our Ouija board episode, go back and listen to episode 49. We'll put that in the show notes too.
Yes. So far the movie is pretty normal. I thought it was actually somewhat slow at this part, but here's where things start getting weird. During a house party that Chris hosts, Reagan, seemingly appears in the living room and pees over the carpet and tells the guest, Father Dyer, that he's going to die. After she's put back to bed, her bed violently shakes. Reagan's personality grows violent, and Chris takes her to various doctors to get her checked and even exhibits some supernatural strength. Reagan does, I mean. Around this time, the director, Dennings, is left alone with Reagan and is found dead at the bottom of a set of public steps that begin below Reagan's window. Side note, dying by falling out of a window is called defenestration, which I find hilarious.
I did not know there was a word for that very specific kind of death. Fascinating.
I know. A detective questions Carras and confides that Dennings' head is turned backwards, The prevailing theory here is that he was pushed out of the window, but no one can tell who could have pushed him because at the time, Reagan was alone in the house. We also see the famous scene with Reagan's head turning around backwards in this part of the movie. So Reagan's confined to her room, and Chris, the mom, is now convinced that her daughter is possessed, and so she seeks out Karas, who visits Reagan. Reagan claims to be the devil, speaks in tongues, and vomits on Karas's face. The demon that seems to possess Reagan says he'll be there until Reagan is dead, and the church allows an exorcism. So for the exorcism scenes, Father Marin arrives and enters Reagan's bedroom, followed by Karas. We get another famous scene here where, as Father Marin is performing the exorcism, Reagan vomits bright green bile at him. When Karas leaves, here's where we get the power of Christ compels you scene. Then Karas leaves, Marin continues praying and doing the exorcism alone, and is subsequently found dead in the room while Reagan watches and laughs. Karas beats the possessed Reagan in a fit of rage, then demands the demon take him instead and save Reagan, which happens. And then Karas jumps out of the window, sacrificing himself, dying by falling down the steps, same as Dennings. And Reagan is freed and has no recollection of the event. And end scene.
So that's the movie, and even in the summary, I think it's really chilling. It's really something to watch. So if you made it this far and you're like, maybe I should watch that movie, you should. It really holds up. But other than just the movie being good, there's always been rumors and stories about the filming and production time here. Scary or supernatural things happened throughout production. So, during production, it was originally scheduled for 85 days, but it actually ended up taking over 200 days to wrap. The movie went $2.5 million over budget, which is $13.8 million in today's money.
Jeez, over.
Early on in production, the movie suffered a fire that destroyed all of the house sets. Was this a curse because of the subject of the movie? Probably not. The fire actually started because a bird flew into the circuit box.
Yes.
But R.I.P. bird. Injuries to the cast and crew also slowed production. The actress who played Chris hurt her back during a scene where the possessed Reagan threw her backwards, and this injury caused her to not be able to film for 2 weeks and left her in crutches for the rest of the shoot. She actually fractured her coccyx, which sounds incredibly painful.
Mm-hmm.
Linda Blair, who played Reagan, fractured her spine after being so loosely strapped to the rocking bed, and she developed scoliosis and a lifelong aversion to cold. There were other miscellaneous accidents, like a carpenter cutting off his thumb, and another technician lost a toe. And there were a few deaths also. So McGowan, who played Dennings, the director, died a week after completing his scenes. The night watchman, the operator of the refrigeration system for Regan's room, and an assistant cameraman's newborn also died during filming, not necessarily while the movie was being filmed, not necessarily on set.
Right, these are all during production time.
Family members of the cast and crew also died during production, including Blair's grandfather during the first week.
Yeah. So, was this movie cursed? Question mark? Even their on-set priest tried to help this, quote, curse. So the production had a technical advisor, and this technical advisor was a priest. So the director asked him to perform an exorcism because they were, quote, plagued by strange and sinister things from the beginning, according to the director. So this advisor, Father Birmingham, did not perform an exorcism. Instead, he blessed the cast and crew, believing that an actual exorcism would just make everyone more anxious. But also, in my mind, when I was reading that, I was like, that's not why you didn't do it. You didn't do it because you need permission from the church to do an exorcism. So,
is that actually true? Like, does the Vatican have to sanction all?
Yes, in order to have an exorcism, there's like a lot of different steps that have to happen. But a sanctioned exorcism has to be approved by the Vatican. I don't know if it has to be approved by the Pope himself. Like, I don't think you get like a gold leaf paper with a signature of the Pope that says, hooray, do it.
Yeah.
But I know that it is something that is very specific and very sanctioned by the church.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So there was all that drama happening during the production of the film, but what happened when it was actually released? Well, turns out the movie was a huge box office success. But also, when the film debuted, it also released some of the most shocking reactions in history, gaining a reputation that would follow it throughout its stay in theaters. Even the film critic Roger Ebert from the Chicago Tribune wrote, "I'm not sure exactly what reasons people will have for seeing this movie. Surely enjoyment won't be one of them." But people must have had their reasons, because they even lined up outside the theaters in the weeks that followed the initial premiere date just to get ready to see the possession of Reagan by a demon and the torturing of her mother, Chris. Some people even returned to see it a second time, though if you believe the reactions, this fact might be hard to believe.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that fact, but as I was reading this and I when I read this specific thing, I was like, wow, I don't remember the last time I saw people lining up for a movie.
You go see one of these three movies and they don't like change again in a week, like they're there. I don't know. I feel like movies were a bigger deal.
Yeah.
There were fewer entertainment options and they came out less frequently, is what I sort of feel like about movies during this time.
Yeah, I guess
And I
so.
could feel like with the word of mouth, like, because this movie, like I say, it holds up. It is horrifying. And I could see people turning around and telling all their buddies, like, you guys have to go see this movie. And then, like, everyone running back to the theater to see it again. I can see that happening.
Well, that's funny because in Toronto, a university theater reported that moviegoers were mainly students seeking a thrill after hearing all these shocking responses.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a student quota saying everyone's talking about it at school, everyone's saying don't go, which kind of makes you want to go more.
Right. Yeah, I can totally see that happening. But it's also famous for having some viewers suffering actual physical reactions to the movie, like fainting or vomiting. Theater managers actually confirmed that vomiting was a common occurrence. The New York Times even reported that people had heart attacks, and a woman even had a miscarriage in the theater, though the Times eventually noted that the heart attacks might have been exaggerated slightly.
Yeah.
That one's a little bit more extreme, but I can totally buy people vomiting in there.
Yes.
Initially, many cities tried to ban it from viewing, though it was given an R rating. People, especially parents, said it should have been given an X rating. Mixed reviews but sold out shows made the film profitable. In the original theatrical run, the film grossed $193 million and has a lifetime gross of $441 million with its re-releases. Some of this profit also came from Warner Brothers' use of four-wall distribution, which is a practice where a studio or distributor rents movie theaters for a period of time and receives all of the box office revenue. So The Exorcist was actually the first time a major studio had done this, and it became the highest-grossing R-rated horror film until It 2017, which grossed over $704 million.
Mm-hmm.
Incidentally, out of the top 10 highest-grossing R-rated horror films of all time, 5 of them are possession-based.
Yeah. So we must love this. But but the movie centers around an exorcism. So for those out there who may be unfamiliar with the word exorcism, it is an exorcism in the Catholic Church falls in the category of sacramentals. That is one of the sacred signs to, quote, sanctify different circumstances of life. The church uses these prayers when a person needs to be protected against the power of the devil or to be withdrawn from his spiritual dominion. So, how did the church react to The Exorcist? Uh, Supposedly, it viewed the movie as somewhat positively, right? The church reportedly thought that the film reinforced the power of the church and faith, and it was reported that the film actually encouraged people to attend church. In New Jersey, there's a report of a 19-year-old girl who sought counseling after watching the movie and spent the entire night praying the rosary with her parents. There's always those who like to be a bit of a pest, though, and to once again quote one of my favorite podcasters, Yuck People's Yums, because there were people who wanted it banned. Even studio director William Friedkin from the movie himself is quoted as saying, quote, one of the best things that could happen is if the Pope denounces it.
Yep, no such
End
thing
quote.
as bad publicity.
Well, I know, right? And funnily enough, because the Catholic Church official standing on the film is a cautionary rating and a critical review, and then Protestant groups and leaders condemned the film, and initial studio executives used this to their advantage as marketing a, quote, film that the church doesn't want you to see is actually more publicity, just like Jackie just said.
Exactly. That's going to get the word of mouth going for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
But it was also critically acclaimed, so the movie was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, including Best Director and Best Picture. It didn't win either of them, but it's still exciting for a genre film to be nominated. It was the first horror film, actually, to have been nominated for Best Picture, and it did win Best Screenplay and Best Sound. It was also nominated for 6 Golden Globes, winning 4. It won Best Picture, Drama, Best Supporting Actress for Linda Blair, Best Director in a Motion Picture, and Best Screenplay. It was also included on some lists like the American Film Institute 100 Years series, which was a series of lists from 1998 to 2008 celebrating the centennial of cinematic milestones intended to inspire discussion and public interest in classic Hollywood. So this big fancy list has The Exorcist as number 3 in its 100 Years, 100 Thrills list. AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains list, which is a list of screen characters from 2003, half and half between heroes and villains, has Regan as number 9. It was also listed in the 2010 Library of Congress Preservation for the National Film Registry.
It even has its own following in films. Many sequels have come since the 1973 release of The Exorcist, some dating as recently as 2023. So the series sequels goes in this order. Obviously, The Exorcist is the first, right? Exorcist 2, The Heretic from 1977, The Exorcist 3 from 1990, Exorcist, The Beginning, 2004. I love when they put colons in
I know, me
titles.
too.
Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist from 2005, The Exorcist, Believer in 2023.
I haven't even heard of half of those.
I knew about 2 and 3, and I want to say I have heard about the beginning, but the last 2, no. And as recently as 2023, like,
I don't know how I missed that.
I don't know how I missed that either. But yeah, so anyway, yeah, 2023 was last year. For all those of you who listen to this in a few years' time, 2023 literally just ended. It feels like yesterday. It was 10 months ago. But anyway, that is actually kind of a great transition into today, speaking of today, because it is 2024. So since The Exorcist keeps inspiring sequels, apparently, it has also been very impactful to other horror films and to the horror film industry in general. So horror film popularity increased big time after The Exorcist. The movie going over budget had an impact on future horror films because studios began to allot more money to horror. Later films with similar themes like The Omen and the Amityville Horror received bigger budgets. Studios also began to cast well-known actors in horror movies. This was something that had been avoided in the past. And we see a lot of realism in horror movies. And by that, I mean the use of things like the dummy's head turning around scene in this movie, the makeup on Regan as she descends into possession. Both have inspired many movies to use realistic effects to create horror, and which now, with time, have been replaced with CGI. There's even an impact on music for horror movies. So The Exorcist score used works like Polymorphia, which is a 1961 piece by Polish composer Krzysztof Penderecki, which is terrifying composition of ambient hums, and we'll definitely link in the show notes because it is pretty terrifying.
Yeah,
like I listened to it while I was researching.
And do not listen to it with the lights off, or do if you're into that sort of thing. It's very spooky.
It is very spooky. It's a great piece, though. This led to more modern or avant-garde composers like Penderecki in later horror films, such as The Shining, and widespread use of techniques like dissonant intervals, like tritones, sound masking, and tone clusters, to create tension and a feeling of unease. All this becomes more of the norm in horror movies. So think of any good horror movie score with like intensifying screeching and hums, usually employed to create tension as the main character is about to find something disturbing or a killer is following a character. That's what we mean. So like, seriously, go listen to Polymorphia. We'll link it in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, of course, had impact on sequels, right? The practice of multi-film horror series had declined in the 1960s, though many movies in the 1930s had spawned series of films. Before the 1970s, the practice of sequels was kind of like a secondary thought of studios. But The Exorcist's success in the box office led to the release of its first sequel, The Exorcist II, The Heretic, in 1977, like we mentioned earlier, and to a number of subsequent sequels. But it really, what it did was it spawned this idea to studios that, hey, if we're profitable, we can have a second film of the same topic, horror topic, I mean.
So all of the big, long 10-movie horror franchises today could probably look back and thank The Exorcist for that.
Yep, exactly.
But the film industry isn't the only one being affected. Even those who have never seen the movie have surely seen bits and pieces, or at least parodies of the exorcism, the levitating, or the bed shaking, or the head spinning. So here's some examples of the exorcist in pop culture. Scenes have been used and referenced in works ever since the movie's release. The many bedroom scenes have actually been used by political cartoonists such as Mike Lukovich and Mike Peters. SNL has parodied the exorcism scene at least twice, once in their first season and then again in 2023 with Jenna Ortega in Regan's role. In the great 1984 film Ghostbusters, Sigourney Weaver's character levitates while it's possessed by an evil spirit. And in 1990, Even Blair, the OG Regan, starred in a movie parody called Repossessed as a housewife who needs an exorcism.
Yeah, so some couple of last miscellaneous thoughts on The Exorcist. In 2015, the District of Columbia placed a plaque on the steps used in the movie. These are the steps where both the director and the exorcist die, right below Reagan's window. And they did this because they became a huge touristy spot. And incidentally, I stayed super close to these steps when I was in Washington, D.C. when was it? I went in 2018. But anyway, that's not important to the story.
Yeah.
I stayed super close to these steps, and I didn't even know this. And I kind of wish I had, because I could, hindsight being 2020. But that would have been a really cool post on Instagram for our podcast,
or just like a really cool tourist spot while you're there, like while you're in town.
Yeah. So now I kind of have to go back to Washington D.C.
That's kind of like how the first time I went to Albuquerque, I hadn't seen Breaking Bad yet. Then next time I went to Albuquerque, made a point to go to every place they filmed Breaking Bad because like now I knew what was going on. I was just like walking around like, gee, all these shirts say Breaking Bad on them. Maybe I should watch that show.
Lastly, guys, the film it just celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2023 to great success, reminding the world how impactful the movie is, but also spurred a book, which is my next to read after I finish the actual book of The Exorcist. And this book is called The Exorcist Legacy, 50 Years of Fear. It was published on July 25th, 2023, and authored by Nat Segeloff. And that is The Exorcist. So now should be time for our etiquette segment. But for spooky season, we decided to do other spooky mid-century media recommendations instead during this part of the episode. So Jackie, what do we have today?
So you already mentioned this one in passing. But for this episode, I decided to recommend one of my favorite horror movies of all time, which actually has quite a few themes in common with The Exorcist, namely children, villains, Satan, and the church. It's The Omen from 1976. So this film's plot follows Damien, a young child replaced at birth by his father, unbeknownst to his wife. And as a series of mysterious events and violent deaths occur around the family, enters childhood, they come to learn that he is in fact the Antichrist.
Ooh.
So I really love this movie. It's actually the first horror movie I ever watched that didn't give me nightmares immediately.
I was there.
Yes, you were there. I was just going to say, if you remember, because we watched it at Apanowitz's house.
Yes, I was just thinking of Apanowitz's house. Yes. Guys out there in podcast land, we've known each other for a while.
And also, I kind of mentioned, I don't know if I'm cutting it out of the episode, but that time in horror, there were a lot of horror movies that came out that were genuinely terrifying in this, like, jump scare, spooky images kind of way. And then I don't know why, decided to watch this random horror movie from 1976. And it honestly watches more like a drama.
It does.
Sorry.
I vividly remember it being a huge deal in our circle of friends in high school that we were watching this movie. I vividly remember that.
Other things that are really interesting about it, other than the fact that it sort of like, it watches like a drama, the child who literally is the Antichrist is actually not personally involved in any of the violence. It's really interesting. It's like all of this violence is happening around the kid, but not necessarily because the kid is doing the violent thing, which I think is a really interesting way to film the movie. And it also keeps the main characters guessing a lot longer than I think they would have otherwise. Gregory Peck is in it, and he's great. He's great in everything, but especially good in this. And this, I guess, probably we can thank The Exorcist for, as you mentioned earlier, big name actors being in horror films now. Like, now it's okay to do genre movies, so that's probably why. It also includes apocalypse-obsessed church cults, which are always fun in a horror film, and it was filmed on location in London, which means it was probably expensive, but worth it aesthetically. So it's a slow burn, but I really, really love it, and I actually considered it to be my favorite horror movie of all time for most of my life until it was replaced by It Chapter 1 in 2017, which is now my official favorite horror movie right now.
I don't think I have an official scary or horror movie.
Really?
Like, official best of the best.
I love picking out favorites and, like, making ranking lists of everything.
You should work for BuzzFeed.
Yeah. But,
well, as we discussed earlier, though, like, whenever I'm in the mood for a scary movie, I have to, like, sit down and be like, okay, what kind of scary movie am I, like, in the mood for? Do I want, like, a slasher film? And by that, I mean, like, a 90s slasher film, which are superior to anything that came after. Or do I want to watch, like, a supernatural movie, like The Exorcist or The Omen? Or do I want to watch what I personally find actually scary horror movies, which are realistic ones, like breaking into your house type movies, because those can actually happen. Like, that's scary to me. So, like, that's why I don't think I can come up with, like, a favorite, all-time favorite, because there's just so many nuances in horror movies, right?
So, we liked it in high school. Have you rewatched this as an adult? Like, do you still like this movie, or did it get overshadowed by all the horror
No,
movies?
I still like it. I have not seen the remake
It was
of recent years. Well, I didn't see it on purpose because I liked the original one. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, like, why do you need to make a scene-by-scene remake?
You don't. I saw it. It was fine.
But yeah, any final thoughts on The Exorcist or on The Omen?
Just that if anyone listening hasn't seen either of them, you should go watch them and then tell us everything you think about them. Because I want to talk about scary movies all month long. Yes,
The Exorcist. So The Omen I don't know about, but The Exorcist is streaming on HBO Max. If you have that, it is also on Amazon Prime Video.
Neat.
So if you have either of those, and if not, you can go to Blockbuster. Oh wait, no. But anyway, it looks like with that we have landed the plane. So thank you guys all for listening today. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the show and tell a friend.
You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. This is the best place to send us feedback and episode suggestions, so send us a DM anytime. And you can also find us on YouTube at MCL Podcast, which is the same handle. You can also contact us through our Send Us a Text Message feature in the show notes, and if you do, we'll read that on our next episode.
Yes, send us some fan mail. And as always, if you see yourself standing in front of a long set of stairs, don't fall and break your head.
Yeah. Also, don't play with Ouija boards or...
Yes, don't play for Ouija boards. Yes.
Yeah, that's just going to be the moral of every episode in October. Just like, don't play with...
definitely. So, thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Mid-Century Living. Please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave a review. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. See you next Friday.